Welcome to the Health Revolution, the program that shows you how to have a life of vibrant well-being. In a world full of noisy health trends, we bring you clarity. We reveal the science-backed strategies that truly work in a sea of fads. We explore the physical strength, emotional resilience, and mental mastery. These are the keys to an enriched life. Join us for inspiring interviews with champions who've conquered life's health challenges. Are you ready to unlock your potential to live with vitality and purpose? Then join the Health Revolution. I'm your host, Adriana Morrison, health and fitness expert, speaker, and a mom who understands. Let's embark on this transformative quest. Together, we're about to change the game starting now. The information provided in this show is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. Viewers should use their own discretion and consult with a healthcare professional for personalized guidance and recommendations. Welcome, everybody. You are watching the Health Revolution. I'm your host, Adriana Morrison, and we are delighted that you are joining us today. Please don't forget that no matter which way you're tuning into us, do not forget to hit the subscribe button so that we can stay connected to you. Also, on the bottom of your screen, there's a little tab for show episode notes. Please refer to that. There's some valuable information about today's episode that you are going to want to tap into. And as we're getting into things, we know that to have optimal health means that the physical strength, the emotional resilience, the mental mastery is on point. And then what happens when life lands a plot twist in your direction? Things such as burnout, things such as trauma, or even divorce. These are some areas in which so very many people have experienced. Many women out there are doing their very best to navigate through these different areas that are such common topics that women have gone through. And what is the best way to go through some of these troubling chapters in our lives? And how do we prosper from that? Well, our guest today is a woman who is well-versed and who is ready to talk to us about how to conquer just these topics. First, take a look at this. Meet Laura Kolomyjec, a boundaries and divorce coach dedicated to empowering women in their relationships and beyond. Laura helps women stand in their worth, speak up in healthy ways, and end the burnout cycle. She guides them to reconnect with their inner power, create and maintain loving boundaries, and develop unshakable confidence. Laura's personal journey through burnout, trauma, and divorce inspired her mission. She assists women in navigating life after divorce, fostering healthy co-parenting relationships, and discovering who they truly are. And today, we will learn how Laura's transformative coaching can help women thrive. Laura Kolomyjec, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. And coming all the way from Australia, thrilled to have you and spend time with you. My first question right off the bat is boundaries and divorce. You know, these two areas are, they definitely coexist in terms of having to master. What makes this such a tricky area for so many people, women in particular, who are going through a boundaries issue with their divorce?
Well, typically what I see is a lot of women, my clientele in particular, are women who either have been left or they have chosen to leave a marriage, or they're in the process of choosing to leave. And they are highly empathic souls. They are what I like to call highly sensitive souls, and they tend to lack boundary issues. And the trends that I've seen really is that the boundary issues that the challenges that you had in your marriage often don't go away, and in some cases get worse after you get divorced, because there's a lot of feelings flying around. So it's such a hot topic. It's such a big thing. Women come to me and they are struggling in their co-parenting relationships. They are struggling with their ex-husband, their ex-partner, and it can be a huge issue and a huge part of many women's personal journeys post-divorce.
And we do recognize these days that more marriages are ending in divorce, and it's unfortunate. And I'll tell you that I'm definitely someone who's experienced that. My first marriage did not last more than 7 years, and I got to tell you, the emotions that you go through are quite the challenge. They can be very intense. What makes it so hard to establish boundaries in from the get-go if someone is not well versed in establishing those boundaries to begin with?
One of the biggest things I see is that women who are very empathic, who are very highly sensitive, and if they have left a marriage, they tend to feel really guilty about setting boundaries because they can usually feel that their ex partner, their ex husband is hurting. And so I tend to see a lot of women hold back from those boundaries, or often we have grown up with voices in our head that tell us that setting a boundary is actually selfish. But I see a real trend where women suffer from numerous health issues. We've spoken about burnout, but there's numerous other ones, fatigue, um, often sort of throat issues, a lot of sore throats, being really run down, having a very low immune system because they are still exhibiting the patterns that they had in the marriage, thinking that, oh, I've divorced this person now, it's going to go away. And it often doesn't, unfortunately, unless we keep doing the work on it. It's a huge, huge hot topic.
How much of this originates from self-care or lack of self-care before the marriage?
I think self-care is a huge thing. And I think for women who are these types of people, which is a lot of women, if we're honest, lack of self care is a huge one. I think what I tend to see is that the women that do leave, they've kind of put this in place a little bit, but it has to really almost more, particularly if you're dealing with someone that may be a selfish or a narcissistic ex partner, your self care's got to go to the top of the list. If you aren't engaging in self care, then that is another huge factor that's going to contribute to burnout. It's
So,
massive.
so we're going to talk about several topics. Obviously, we're going right off the bat with divorce. Why do marriages fall apart? What do you see?
The trend I'm tending to see is that what was acceptable 20, 30 years ago for a man to provide is changing a lot. Women are able to hold down great jobs now. They are able to have the financial freedom. And so they're not really needing, a lot of women are, but there are a lot of women staying in marriages for fear that they won't financially survive as well. But the women that are leaving are recognizing that they need more than a financial provider. And I guess the patriarchal views that have existed in society before, where perhaps a woman hasn't been encouraged to speak up and is now recognizing that her voice is really important, she's now starting to speak up. But often I'm seeing a lot of marriages dissolve because it isn't being heard on the other end. And that creates a lot of friction and a lot of tension. And a lot of women are leaving. And sometimes they are left as well. But these issues still come up post marriage because they realize that this is what I needed to work on. This was what I was not happy with in my marriage. And I guess a lot of the work I do with women is to encourage them to have that voice so they can attract in something different in their life going forward.
So a lot of the data out there will suggest that that there's a tendency for more women to leave a marriage or to seek the dissolution of a marriage. What do you see in the case of a man wanting to leave? What are some instances in which you've seen a man wanting to leave a marriage?
Well, the men that come to me obviously are men that fall under the same bracket. They are highly sensitive, they lack boundaries, they are empathic. It's usually the same issues as women. They're now dealing with a co-parent that is potentially angry if they have left that partner, that female partner. There's still a lot of feelings. And I think the work that I do with my clients is to make sure that we work through those feelings, because it often gets projected out onto the children and to our ex-husband or ex-partner if we don't do that work. I think it's highly important for us to, I mean, we're choosing divorce, but we need to choose what's the best thing for our kids as well. And when we still have ill feelings, anger, sadness, rage, disappointment towards our ex-partners because sometimes they couldn't be what we wanted them to be, we really need to work through that. I'm not saying you need to work through it in a week or a month, but it takes time. But it's really, really important for our children, I think, to have a model of a parent who, or at least one parent who has worked through these issues, so it's not affecting them, basically.
In the
Yeah.
cases where you're seeing families where this is now on the table, divorce, and then there's kids involved, how do you approach a family where, by all accounts, the beginning of the family, the marriage, was where it needed to be, and then the breakdown happened at some point along the way? Is it that you see the breakdown happen typically when kids are born or kids come into the picture, or is that not as predictable?
I think definitely having children, I can speak from clients' perspectives that having children changes a lot for a mother. Um, I can speak from my personal perspective too. You're now have got so much less free time, and the stress and the strain. God bless, we love our children, but they do, we choose to have them, but it is a higher stress level, particularly when they're really, really little. And if women are having them in their 30s, sometimes in their late 20s, sometimes later on, they're having them late 30s, early 40s, if they're lucky, this can create a period of self-growth in women and men, but much more, I think, in women, where they realize that what they tolerated before no longer really works anymore, because there is rare cases, I think, where the woman is allowed to stay at home and raise the children, so her stress levels are maybe a little bit lower, yet still quite high, because as you know, as I know, having small children is a lot. But then if a woman is expected to contribute to the providing, and then she's got to come home and do a lot of the household chores, a lot of the work behind the scenes, with husband not contributing, this is leading to a lot of burnout in women. And a lot of women are speaking up about it, but it's not being heard, because unfortunately there's still some views that it's a woman's job to do it. Not always. I meet a lot of men who are willing to contribute 50-50, but more and more I see that women are burnt out as a result of this.
Can you describe what burnout looks like in a marriage, and some examples of, from the woman's perspective, of what would classify as burnout?
I think there's a varied number of symptoms, but difficulty sleeping, sleeping more, sleeping less. I think anxiety and depression can manifest as burnout as well, and can actually be an issue that, if we address those small factors behind the anxiety and depression, what's causing it, then the burnout can be eradicated. Lack of self-care, which we talked about before, is a huge thing. And just health issues, general lower immune system, a higher susceptibility to getting sick, coughs, colds, flus, all sorts of things. I do generally see a lot of kind of womb issues, a lot of issues in the pelvic region around this area, because it is related to our throat and speaking up and being seen. So I see a number of issues come forward that I really think are all linked to burnout. And I think probably some of the biggest ones are those feelings of desperation, feeling angry all the time, feeling on edge, feeling irritable, and they can be a real symptom that we are actually burnt out. Some of us don't know until we've reached quite a burnt out state, and it can sometimes take the assistance of someone or a really good like doctor to point these out.
Is there a difference between burnout and, say, postpartum depression, or how are the two related? If a woman is experiencing one or the other, or maybe from what you're saying, quite possibly both.
I think they are very heavily linked. I'll speak from my personal experience too. I had a lot of childhood trauma. So once my daughter was born, that childhood trauma, unbeknownst to me, was locked within my system. That she was such a blessing because I couldn't hold it in my body anymore. So that trauma had to move through the body. I did a lot of talk therapy before I had my daughter, but it didn't really work in that sense. And I definitely think the burnout and the postpartum depression and anxiety go hand in hand, because when you're in that state of feeling anxious, depression, sadness, it's exhausting, and it can be heavily linked to burnout. So yeah, I do think they go hand in hand.
For
Yeah.
me, I know I felt postpartum depression. The only time that it really hit home for me was when I have four kids, and they were all born one, two, three, four in my 30s, and when number two was born, when my oldest daughter was born, I went through postpartum depression, and the level of desperation was there, and I think that at the time it just the support that I needed based on what all that was happening in the environment, it wasn't where I could have had the backing. And so I felt like I was just scrambling to have two kids under 13 months and
Mm.
and everything in check. And so that obviously was a huge plot twist on my end. And what is the feedback that you're hearing from women that you're working with? Are they able to describe burnout as in being taken by surprise that they feel the way that they do? Do they feel internal pressures to keep it together? What do you notice at times when you're working with women?
Well, yeah, all of the above. I think I myself am very much a perfectionist, a high achiever, so I tend to attract those sorts of clients too. So they are often coming to me with that model that they think they can do what they did before they had children, and it doesn't work. I mean, you and I both know that the sleepless nights, the endless, it's a 24/7 job really, because when they're really little, you're up all night. And I think a lot of women have a real unrealistic expectation as to what they can get done. I know certainly in my journey, I had to really rework through that model. And honestly, still doing it now. I'm almost 41, where how much you get done in a day is a lot less, definitely a lot less. And yes, I think a lot of women, I wouldn't say it's a denial of their burnout, but they're not quite really aware, and anxiety issues are presenting, depression issues may be presenting, and it's actually really heavily linked to burnout. And when we can work through the issues, sometimes they are boundary issues with their partner, sometimes they are learning to speak. That's, what a lot of women I come to and see is that we're not taught to speak up for what we want when we're younger. Some of us did have that model as a child, but a lot of us didn't, and a lot of us bit our tongues to keep quiet. But it I tend to see it leads to an explosion over time, where we're just not aware that we actually have needs, and we have things that need to be hard conversations that need to be had, and then that anger sits inside of us for quite a long time, and it sometimes initially can come out quite huge because we're not aware of it.
How much of the pressures that women have to help cover income at home and help take care of the kids, how much of that do you think comes from the picture perfect model of I've got to do it all? Is there more realization that you're hearing from women that, you know what, maybe I just can't do it all? Maybe some things are going to maybe some things are just going to have to wait by the wayside until I can get to them.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a huge factor. I think perhaps social media hasn't really played a really beautiful part here because we often see everyone's beautiful life on social media, and what we don't see is the child vomiting all over us at 7 a.m. in the morning, or, the child sick. We don't see that side of it. And that is life. That is life with children. And I think women are starting to realize they can't have it all. I will speak to my own journey and speak that I went from a place of wanting that financial, like being higher up, to realizing that I actually don't need it as much as I thought I needed it. And it's the smaller moments, it's the happiness. And it has meant that, you know, women that go down this journey, like, you get pressure from your children. Why is my schoolmates going to on this beautiful holiday, or why are they getting this amazing present, and why aren't we getting that, mum or dad? And that's where boundary issues come in too, and it takes a lot of holding on to our own values of, I'm actually not here to provide, financial stability, and providing financially is important for our children, but it's the presence that's actually, I think, a lot more important for a lot of children.
And there's a lot more that we're going to unpack. First, we're going to take a commercial break. Stay right there. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back after this. Hey everyone, it's Adriana, and welcome back to Fit Bites. Today, let's talk about the importance of posture correction. So good posture isn't just about looking confident. It's crucial for our overall health, especially as we age. Poor posture can lead to back pain, headaches, and even digestive issues. Now first, be mindful of how you're sitting and standing throughout the day. Keep your shoulders back, your chin up, and avoid slouching. When sitting, make sure that your feet are flat on the floor and that your back is supported. Incorporate exercises that strengthen your core and your back muscles. Planks, bridges, and rows are great for improving your posture. Stretching your chest and shoulders can also help counteract the effects of sitting for long periods of time. Using tools like ergonomic chairs and standing desks can make a big difference. Also, take regular breaks to move around and reset your posture. Remember, small adjustments can lead to big improvements in how you feel and move. Stand tall, stay strong, and stay tuned for more Fit Bites with Adriana. Welcome back to the Health Revolution. Welcome back, everybody. My guest today, Laura Kolomyjec, she's a divorce and boundaries coach. We're talking about how to navigate through these areas in our lives in which we're establishing boundaries. And of course, one of them being that tricky chapter in life where many people do, in fact, experience divorce, and what happens in the case when there are children involved, and how do you navigate through that? And so, Laura, before the break, you were talking about the importance of being able to use your voice. You started to touch on the empowerment piece, and we talked about burnout and how the two are heavily interlocked, hand in hand. And talk a little bit about, let's scale it back and let's talk about the boundaries piece. And so for women who are, or for anyone going through a divorce, and it's obviously a tricky situation, what does it mean to define a boundary, and how do you change the nature of how you were moving before to then establish a boundary and do it in the name of self-care, in the name of being able to take a better foot forward?
Thanks. That's a great question. A boundary is basically how you'd like to be treated. And there's a wonderful child parenting expert, I think she's American, and she says that a boundary actually requires the other person not to do anything. I kind of disagree with that because I think sometimes if you're setting a boundary, like what I see is, a client might have a emotionally abusive ex-husband that the divorce has often made it worse. And so an example of a boundary may be, please don't contact me via this way, via phone. Please don't contact me via text. But it needs to be framed in the sense of, if you do contact me this way, I will not reply, you know. So a boundary, I guess, requires that other person to do nothing because the consequence that we set if the boundary is violated comes from us. The post-divorce journey, I think, is huge. I think for women that have chosen to leave, it's often can be a little bit of a harder uphill journey because I think sometimes when the man's made that decision, or if it's a male and the ex-partner or ex-husband's made that decision, then it can be a little bit easier. I think there's sometimes a little bit less guilt around setting boundaries. The biggest thing I see is that a woman leaves a man, they can feel their ex-husband's feelings around it. So they're like, oh, I won't set that boundary because it's going to upset them. And my work with clients is to see that sometimes, we talked about burnout before, sometimes they start feeling burnt out again because they're taking on responsibility for something that actually isn't really theirs. So it's a huge thing.
So boundaries is huge. And I can't help but ask, sometimes we will say and do things in response to a past memory or a past something that's happened, and it affects how we are interacting with others. So then you touched on boundaries and empowerment for women, and then obviously going through divorce. How does a woman distinguish between responding to a real-time situation that is concerning a divorce and not being triggered by a past memory that maybe isn't necessarily relevant to the current decision that she's making with her partner, with her husband?
That's a huge thing. I think that I call it projection, where we may have had a lot of boundary violations in our childhood. We may have had it in our marriage too. And what I tend to see, usually, unless the ex-husband has done a substantial amount of work on himself, because often women are leaving because their boundaries are being violated. And unless that ex-husband has gone and done a lot of work and is starting to actually respect the boundaries, that women typically aren't really projecting. Their intuition is usually quite true. There are cases sometimes where it's not, and you'll usually feel quite triggered, but a lot of us don't actually know how that feels inside. And so that's, I think, where my role comes in, because it's for some people it can be like a really subtle energy, but it's not really picked up within them. They can just think that they feel really angry, but they're actually projecting it from a past relationship. One of the other common things I see is that women come to me and they start doing a lot of work on themselves. They then enter into much more healthy relationships, but they're projecting their experience with their ex-husband, where they had repeated boundary violations, onto the new partner, poor new partner, who often is of a different, he respects boundaries, he listens to boundaries, he has his own, and that can be really, really tricky. And that's when we talk about that triggering, that that feeling that comes through. But a lot of women don't recognize it. I certainly didn't when I first started doing this work, where I remember the first partner I had out of divorce, I projected something from my previous relationship onto him, but it actually wasn't anything he was doing. It was, our previous experience comes to the forefront and can do a lot of damage if it's left unchecked.
So, how much of that is habit and how much of that is fear based?
It's a bit of both, I think. Um, Habit definitely is probably the big one. The fear, I think, comes in for a lot of women because they're now with a man, or if it goes the other way, a man is now with a woman who they actually sense that they can be a lot more vulnerable with. But that in itself is terrifying, because if we have had situations in our past where our vulnerability has been shut down, it has been dismissed, it has been invalidated, that can be terrifying, because again, it is a bit of habit. We're bringing that habit of, this is what happened in the past relationship and it's now going into my present relationship. Often it can be actually really safe to be vulnerable with the new person, but it takes a bit of skill to work through that, for sure.
Do you see the same trends for women who are maybe going through another divorce, that maybe they've had one in the past and they're going through another one, or they've been married more than once, and that, say, in the case of a woman who is going through a second divorce, are there patterns that are just repeating? And if so, for those cases, what is the reason behind those repeated patterns happening?
I haven't actually had a client who's had a second divorce, but I've had clients who have had long-term relationships after their divorce. And yeah, it's definitely, if we don't do the work on ourselves and we don't do the healing, it's often healing of what happened in our childhood, we will attract in the same type of person, just dressed differently. They might look different, but they're still, I like to call it, they're still the same vibrational match, because we haven't changed. When we start to change, and I am testament to this too, when we start to change, what we attract in is something pretty special, because our own sense of self-worth has elevated with the work that we do. So yeah, I think that's a huge thing. I think a lot of women get really frustrated. Why have I entered a relationship again? It might be 2 years, it might be 5 years, it might be another 10 years, and the same patterns have happened. Unless we actually do the healing work, it can be a huge factor. And it takes a lot of courage to do this work. I recognize it, but if you are wanting something different, the results are pretty magical.
I tell you, it reminds me that when I went through my divorce, and my husband and I are now married, we're getting close to 9 years. And I remember there was a point in time where I had to finally take a long, hard look in the mirror and recognize what I bring to the table. And that didn't feel terrific. That felt kind of squirmy, to be honest. And even though, ultimately I was not, my ex-husband and I were not each other's best fit, it was still, we contributed to the just the overall result of why we didn't last. And how much of a struggle is it for women to really to look in the mirror and get real, and not get in a pointing fingers and saying, and just falling into that rut of like, well, it's his fault, or well, it was this, it was that brought everything down.
That's a really great question, because I think blame is such a huge thing. We can blame the other person, but nothing's going to change until we actually do that work. Um, One of my mentors said to me, and it was a really like pivotal moment for me. She said, "Can you imagine being married to someone who you can sense that they have something to say? There's an undertone of anger, there's an undertone of irritation, maybe even some depression because it's gone that far, and you have no idea what's going on inside them." She said it is our responsibility. She's talking more about people pleasing, but it's the same thing: people pleasing, lack of boundaries, not speaking our needs. That can be not so nice, to be married to someone that refuses to speak up. And I think I actually did a post about this the other day. We can't actually call someone selfish until we've communicated our boundary, our needs, what we need, because it's a little bit unreasonable, I think, for someone to read our mind. And this goes the other way. I think men, I typically see, like I have some beautiful male friends, but they laugh about it because men, I think it's actually worse for men. They think, oh, we're not going to speak up. It's terrifying for them. I think women are starting to find their voice, but for men, it's like, oh, I'll just soldier on and not do anything and not speak up. But that's again when the anger issues come through, when the irritation comes through, and the disconnection. I think it leads to a lot of disconnection in a marriage for sure. So it does, like that looking in the mirror. I remember that point too. I mean, it's been 3 years since my divorce, and looking and realizing that nothing's going to change unless I change. It's a horrible moment, but it's also like it's a, oh wow, I have the power to do this. And I think it's, the biggest thing I want to see in my clients is the willingness to do it. Because when we keep blaming the other person, nothing really is going to change, is it?
So
Yeah.
how do you kickstart empowerment, especially in the case of a divorce has happened and suddenly things look different? Maybe there's more financial hardship going on. Now things are just, there's a little bit more of a scramble. Taking care of the kids is a much more complicated situation because the household is changing and all that comes with that. Where do you start with empowerment?
It's really dependent on each client. I think some women come to me because financially, like they may have given up part of their career to raise the children when they were little, and now they're divorced and they're thinking, well, I've actually got to provide. And it can take a little bit of time before they start to have that confidence back in the workplace. I do a lot of somatic work with women, so I work through the body. And I think the other second area, which is usually the biggest area that women come to me, is they have issues, they're constant sore throats, they are, maybe even digestive issues, what's masquerading as anxiety or depression, but it's actually feelings that and emotions that are trapped within the body because they're not having the hard conversations. They're not having the hard conversations with their ex partner. They're not, or ex husband. They're not having it with, sometimes I think once we leave, it starts to shine a light on our own, if we are still connected to our own mother, father, caregivers, it actually starts to shine a light on those relationships as well. And I typically see a lot of those relationships start to change where women or men start to speak up to a parent or a caregiver because we tend to attract in what we had as a child. So if we had a parent who was quite domineering, or like we felt terrified to have boundaries as a child because we knew that they wouldn't be respected, we're often going to attract that in a later relationship to be healed. And I think that's why a lot of marriages are ending, because it's like you said, you recognize with your first husband he wasn't your best fit, but he was needed in your life to heal those parts of yourself that needed healing. And that's, I think, a huge pattern. And it's the recognition that what we had in our childhood can be healed. And sometimes our partner will want to, or husband will want to go along for the ride. And other times, the dynamic of a woman or a man speaking up really changes the dynamic to a point where it's unbearable. Yeah.
There came a point for me that when the divorce was underway, that I had to raise the bar on myself in order to show up and handle the level of uncertainty that was in front of me. The being a single mom to 4 kids, the just the obviously the financial piece was starting to change, and so my self-esteem was not where it needed to be, but I knew that in order to have a fighting chance to get through this chapter, I needed to I needed to raise that bar. How critical is it for women to come to that realization when they're going through a divorce? How quickly does she need to experience that so that way she's able to start taking the right steps forward?
I think how quickly depends on how uncomfortable she is. I think the more discomfort we're experiencing in our life, that is, I don't really believe anyone ever changes until they are so uncomfortable that they're like, I've had enough. I have to change. Um, it looks different for lots of women. Sometimes the marriage might have dissolved, but some women, a marriage dissolves and they're quite burnt out, and they know that unless they do something to crawl back up that ladder to vibrant health, they have to do it now. For other women, they actually weren't that burnt out, and that might come later because they're dealing perhaps with a co-parent that there are some beautiful co-parenting stories, but unfortunately I hear a lot that um, there's often one party that refuses to kind of clean up the ill feelings towards the other partner, and that can really create a lot of issues with the partner or the person in the co-parenting dynamic that is, and that person is usually the one that needs to start speaking up and setting boundaries. A boundary that I often see is that between co-parents is, if you talk to me in an angry tone, I won't talk to you. I will stop the conversation. But a lot of people will keep going, and the argument escalates, and it's huge.
And this is a fascinating piece of what we have to get into. We're going to take a commercial break. Stay put. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back after this. Thank you so much for watching The Health Revolution. Our show is growing, and it's all thanks to viewers like you. No matter how you found us, please hit the subscribe button so we can stay connected and continue to deliver amazing content to you.
Introducing Launchpad, the perfect partner to help you launch your dream project to the world. We know that time is of the essence, and we're here to help you make the most of it. With Launchpad, you'll get access to the most advanced digital tools and strategies to take your idea from a mere concept to a fully fledged success. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur or a seasoned pro, we have everything you need to make your mark in the world. Launchpad, your ultimate launch partner.
We can take our own health into our own hands. Okay, so we'll kind of expand on that. So I take a lot of vitamins every day. Long before I started this business, my wife has had me taking my vitamin C, my B complexes, amino acids every single solitary day, and I still do, even though I still do IVs as well. But when you take vitamins orally, you get 15 to 20% of them. Some people get less because they have autoimmune issues. Some people have a lot of inflammation issues, whatever the case may be, so they don't get the absorption that they need to be getting. So they don't get their immune system built up. Doing the mobile IVs, I'm able to take your immune system, I'm able to naturally boost it.
Welcome back to the Health Revolution. Our guest today, Laura Kolomyjec, she is a boundaries and divorce coach. We are talking about navigating these uncharted waters when a marriage dissolves, when there's kids involved. How do you reintroduce self-empowerment? How do you grow from here? And before the break, Laura, you were talking about how sometimes that level of strife, there's that discord in terms of co-parenting, that there are couples who face that because of the level of work that is just they're not on the same page. And what I'd like to share with you is that, the communication is for someone who had to help co-navigate that with my ex-husband. One of the things that we were able to do is I told him right off the bat, I'm not your adversary. I am your ally. And even though you may not believe me right now because things are coming to an end and feelings are very raw and all that implies, that we just watch. But that's my pledge to the fact that we're still going to be in each other's lives for these 4 kids. And so then that was helpful. I think that in his case, there was a guarded type of stance, not quite sure what to expect. And I just knew that I couldn't wait for him to do it. I just had to just let it be known and then go from there. And that was helpful. Now, would you say that that type of language helps to set the tone to diffuse some of the pushback, the flack that divorcing couples are going through, and then they have to deal with the kids and their livelihoods and how to handle them?
Yes, definitely. But I think we spoke before about how we can blame the other person, but really all the control we have is to work on ourselves. They are definitely words that I would definitely recommend all of my clients, if that feels true for them, which usually it does for most of them, to say to their ex-husband. But I sometimes do find that, if an ex-partner or husband has been really burnt in the past, really, when I say burnt, really hurt, and sometimes their own wounding, their own past relationship stuff can come into it. So you can say to someone, I am your ally, those exact words, but sometimes I do see that they can't actually see that, and they're sort of convinced that you're not, because they've had really negative relationship experiences in the past. So really all we can do is clean up our side, like you said, and say what we need to say. And I think it's very useful to say that, but we actually have to have the actions and take actions as well to show to our children that whilst it didn't work between mum and dad, we are still friends. We are still committed to co-parenting the best we can.
And so you are in Australia and you have helped women near and far. And I want to talk about the type of different ways that you help women. And I want to go ahead and bring up a representation of the type of programs that you have. Talk a little bit about what this looks like when you help women, regardless of where they are. Can you talk a little bit of what you have?
Great. So Coming Home to You is actually a program I have developed. I have not yet recorded, but what it's going to look like is there's going to be 8 modules, and it's really pitched at the woman that I've spoken to in this interview. She's highly empathic. She's highly sensitive. She lacks boundaries. Sometimes she's often a woman that is a high achiever as well. So all of those, Gabe Mate, he's like a world trauma expert. He talks about like all those things put together is a recipe for burnout. Basically, it is like when you put those 4 things together, or even if you've only got 1 or 2 of them, you are much more likely to have like an autoimmune disease or health issues. So Coming Home to You has been designed for that type of woman, but it will benefit women who haven't divorced or who are thinking of divorce, but it's largely for the woman that has, and they're navigating, like you like to talk about this rocky terrain. I call it like a washing machine, because suddenly you've divorced and there's people that don't agree with your divorce. There's children that are maybe not also agreeing with it, and you're often experiencing pushback from a lot of people. And Coming Home to You, like the words that how I feel is like you're anchored within yourself. No matter what someone else says to you, no matter what someone else thinks of you, you're not relying on someone else's external validation for your decision to divorce. And that takes a bit of work. It was certainly a huge part of my own journey, is that people won't agree with what you've done, but you have to stay true to you. I also have a huge self-care component in there, because like we spoke about at the start, women who fall into this bracket are much more likely to have health issues. And so self-care is huge. And I think sometimes women recognize that they need to have self-care in their lives, but to have someone to hold them accountable for that, which is where I come in, is huge. So that's going to be a recorded program, but there's going to be the option to pay an additional fee and work with me one-on-one as well if people want to.
So you have the Body-Led Boundaries and then Soul Alchemy one-on-one coaching. And the Body-Led Boundaries is a group, that's a group format that you have right now?
Yeah. So the Body-Led Boundaries, it's a group call. You do not have to be divorced to enter this. And actually some of the women already coming, 2 of them are still in relationship, and they want to remain in relationship. And but they're struggling with boundary issues in their life. So it is designed for women who fit all those criteria. They're highly sensitive, they're highly driven, they're very empathic, but they're lacking boundaries. And so we use the wisdom of the body. Often there's throat issues, often there's digestive issues, sometimes there's autoimmune disease. And whilst I'm not a doctor, and I want to just say that, if you are experiencing these issues, please do consult a doctor as well. But we can use the wisdom of what's appearing in our body to we discharge a lot of that often, and then we work with women to start having the hard conversations with people in their life. And I can honestly say the women that have been coming I've seen just a huge change in the year or so that they've been coming. It's been really magical to watch.
That's fantastic. And of course we put the QR code is there, and that allows viewers to have access to be able to take a look at each of these to see what best suits them, for those who feel like this is definitely a path to start embracing and check out what you have to offer. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back after this. Welcome back to the Health Revolution. Laura Kolomyjec is my guest today. She is the divorce and boundaries coach. We've been talking about navigating these waters in which so very many people do have to work through this chapter to then get to continue on and grow from there. Laura, where can viewers find you in the virtual space?
So I am on Instagram and on Facebook. I do have a website as well, and also a LinkedIn profile. So there's a few places you can find me.
And what would you tell the woman out there who is wanting to create new space for herself and she's not quite sure how to do so? What is the one piece of advice or recommendation that you would have for her?
Reach out to some sort of support, whether it's me or someone else. I think everyone has someone who's going to benefit from having that support, and it's got to be the right support. I might not be the right person for some, but I think when we're listening to the outside noise of other people's opinions, other people's, some people have their own beliefs around divorce, that you should never get divorced. And sometimes, it's very well-meaning and they're telling you, stay in this marriage, but it's actually the worst thing for that person. So I think having an unbiased support person where you don't have the outside noise of your family, your friends, who are often well-meaning, sometimes not so well-meaning, but you get to cut to the truth of what it is that you want. Sometimes that doesn't actually look like divorce for some women. Sometimes I've helped clients stay and fight for their marriage and work through it, but other times it does. But it's a completely personal decision that I don't think anyone else can make apart from yourself. Yeah.
Laura Kolomyjec, I appreciate you being here, you being a divorce and boundaries coach and offering some valuable information for so many who are going through this very situation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
And for all our viewers, of course, you can find us on the web. Our website is thehealthrevolutiontv.com. You can subscribe to our newsletter and catch up with all the events that are happening as we're rolling into season 3. Also, you can email us with any show ideas you would love for us to cover. On the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you will see a QR code. Feel free to grab that if you will. And then, of course, as always, you can find us every Tuesday and Thursday on the Achieve TV channel on E360 TV, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Thanks to our sponsors for supporting our show. That is all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining us today. Until next time, take care of yourselves. We will see you soon.